This is Linus Sandgren, and you're listening to the Cinematography podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, it's Ilya here for the Cinematography podcast, flying solo today. Unfortunately, Ben Rock, eaten by a werewolf. No, really, Ben, famously, who loves werewolves, is just really sick, so I get the job of flying solo, and I'm sure at some point I'll probably be sick, and he'll have to do this for me. Anyway, first up on the show today is Linus Sandgren. Incredibly talented DP. He's been on the show a couple of times before. He's got a new movie called Saltburn, which is the new movie from Emerald Fennell, and you should definitely check it out. It's in theaters now. Okay, so moving right along, this is going to be a little bit shorter show than usual because I don't have anyone to banter with, but I am going to try and hit all the big points. Close focus for Close Focus today.
And now, Close Focus.
Netflix has released their viewership data. There's going to be a link in the show notes, either below this video or over at the website camnoir.com. The Netflix viewership data is really interesting, and I would encourage everyone to take a peek at it because we're finally getting some transparency in a organization that has traditionally not given us really much in the way of data to find out how shows are doing. And surprisingly, the number one series by watch hours, in fact, the number one program on Netflix for the last 6 months is The Night Agent. You might be asking, what's The Night Agent? I certainly did. I didn't see it, but it has been viewed like 812 million hours of watch time. It doesn't have a ton of big stars in it. In fact, actually, what's particularly interesting is as you start to go through the hierarchy of what's been popular on Netflix for the last 6 months, the biggest shows, the biggest series, not a lot of like huge name stars. It's not like, big A-list Hollywood celebrities. They're series, and it's a mixture of series, mostly from the US, but a few from South Korea. And that is pretty fascinating to me, certainly as someone who's getting into this data. In fact, the first series that I watched anything of wasn't even in the top 3 or 4. That it was number 5, which was Wednesday. I only saw about half of Wednesday. I haven't finished it. I want to go back and get to it. But in the hierarchy, number 18 was the first series I'd seen the entirety of, which was Beef. Beef Season 1 was the number 18th most popular show. And to give you an idea of the difference between, number 18 and number 1, number 18 had only been viewed, Beef had been viewed about 200 million hours of watch time. So roughly a quarter of the watch time of The Night Agent. Of course, a lot of this comes from the fact that Netflix has to be more transparent now due to the agreements with the writers and the actors and the new contract. But it's very refreshing to see them being so forthcoming to put this out there and to put it out there for everyone. They could have made it, more difficult, and it could have had to filter out in different ways, but they put this on their website and anyone can download it. So if you're curious to see who's been watching what, I'm going to encourage you to go download this file. And again, the links are at camnoir.com and also in the show notes if you're watching this on YouTube. Okay, so let's get to the interview with Linus Sandgren.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming back on the show. We had you on here for your James Bond movie, and then last year we had you on here for Babylon, and it would be hard to think of a movie less like those two movies than kind of the intimate character portrait that Saltburn is. But holy crap, I mean, what an engaging, engrossing movie. I read that the director's idea was that it was basically a vampire movie without vampires, and there's something so gothic and evocative about it. And I feel like I have to start with the hackiest question, but I have to start here. Your use of kind of an uncommon aspect ratio. I immediately, I was like, is the theater projecting this wrong? It looks like 4:3, but sure enough, it's 4:3, or 1:3:3 to 1. What prompts you to go into that aspect ratio? I've honestly wondered for many years why more people didn't use that aspect ratio. I feel like we all tried to get away from it when TVs became 16:9. But what brought you into that for this movie?
Right. It's kind of a more painterly composition in terms of how you think of things. And it wasn't like we knew from the start it was going to be 133. I think that came with a couple of discussions. And I feel like every time on every movie, hopefully the language you create is just very unique to this particular film. And same with other films I've done. I feel like I always try to start like with a blank page and just talk a lot about the film in different ways than visually. Like, talk to the director about words they can come up with that relates to the film in any kind of way. Like vampire film, like there's claustrophobia, there's voyeurism, there's close-ups on sweats and body liquids. And at the same time, we're in a castle-like house where the family has been portrayed in paintings for hundreds of years. And they're hanging on the wall still. So I came from that a little bit in the early discussions, where I felt like, how fun wouldn't it be if it felt a bit like we portrayed them kind of like how they've been portrayed over the years. Just this family is like shot the same way again, like as if we were paintings from the 1800s or whatever. Emerald came from the idea that you look into a dollhouse and you peek in and it's voyeuristic. And both those themes, the painterly and the voyeuristic, kind of got me more into thinking 133 than 240. And also with the house having tall ceilings, it was kind of that way. But then when we talked about it being a vampiristic film and which type of paintings would relate to this story, the vampiristic theme, then I think of not 80s vampire movies, but I think of like Nosferatu and like silent movies in the very sort of stark German expressionistic, like pre-film noir, like black and white, really hard contrast of silhouettes. And that would be fun because she wanted it expressive. So all these things, right, creates a language. And I feel like the German expressionism was 133. The paintings on the walls are kind of more square. So I feel like that all felt related with in the painting world, like the Baroque painters, right? Like Caravaggio, and there's one woman, Gentileschi, who painted like amazing, grotesque scenes that you don't want to watch, but because they were so beautifully lit in a dramatic light, you kind of want to watch it because it's just mesmerizing image. And that, it's like that kind of idea of and that was another theme she had, was the beauty and the ugliness. So everything sort of came together to that aspect ratio and to the style of lighting that is more in the vein of sort of Caravaggio for these scenes. But then you go outside and you have the hot summer days, and it was more of that sort of Polaroid type of photography, also square, right? So there was many things actually that made it 133 more than anything else.
When I think of it, like, it makes me think of old-timey movies because, televisions were basically that, because that's what movies were at the time. If you go back and watch Casablanca or Citizen Kane, whatever, like all of those movies are 133, and then movies were trying to give a wider image, which led to, CinemaScope and, Cinerama.
Keep them watching movies in the cinema,
yeah. And what's interesting, and actually, like when I found out that you shot it on film, the Saltburn on film, also, like, 133 and anamorphic are the only ones that use the full frame. Like you're not cropping in on the frame. So did you use the full 35 millimeter frame? Yeah,
we couldn't shoot on 65 budget wise. So I thought, like, what if we use those 1.3 times squeeze lenses from Vantage, the Hawks, in 133, then it becomes 185 or 178 for TV and 185 for cinema. But we use the full negative, but in 1.3 squeeze. So when you look through the viewfinder and you see the whole image, it's so it's really nice. Actually, it's just a nice feeling. And same with 133 now in silent.
But when you're making a film like the kinds of films that you've been making, how many are they going to film print with? Are they doing a lot of prints? Or is it mostly DCP delivery at this point? No,
it's mostly DCP. Up till now, I've done film prints on every film, but it used to be obviously many, right? Like maybe it was thousands of prints. Now it's like a few prints for archival situations. But to me, shooting on film gives me a different negative from, I mean, any format you choose. I feel like whatever format you choose, it's gonna give you different negatives to work with, right? So whether I shoot on a red camera or an Alexa, it's gonna look slightly different. And then with film, it's just, you have so many variables you could manipulate the film, like choosing between 16, 35, 65 is one. The other is just like how you expose the film, because if you expose digital too bright, right, it just clips. But if you expose a film 10 stops over or 5 stops over, it's not clipping. It's just like another look, you know? So more flexibility. Plus, I feel like the film sees colors that just film sees in a way.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you. Like, at this point in your career, you know, you've shot digitally, you've shot on film. Do you kind of look at an individual project and say, this feels more like film? Because like looking at this movie, I could sort of tell, even though it was being digitally projected, it looked like it had been shot on film. It's sometimes it can be very hard to tell because, you know, when you have a really skilled person shooting it, grading it, all that stuff, sometimes even after the grade, it can be so, you know,
for sure. Yeah.
But it looked filmy to me, and maybe it's because we're in kind of these like cavernous big rooms in what I read was a real estate. It's not a movie set. It's a real old house. Like something felt very analog and real about it. But like when you're looking at a project, do you kind of go like, actually, this is perfect for the red for the following reasons, or this is perfect for...
Totally, I would. Yeah. No, totally. It just happens. So like, for example, an example of that is when we did 100-Foot Journey, with Lasse Hallström, which was about food. It was about romanticizing about sort of southern France environment in a combination with like where there's a conflict between two families, but it's sort of a family movie, right?
Yeah.
But we wanted to feel rich and lush, and the production design was amazing, like really lots of hand-blown glass in the sets pieces they built, and it was like very authentic and real and colorful. And stuff when you see a lot of greenery, a lot of trees and rich forests or whatever, and lakes, and you get the shades of colors in the greens and in the blues that is captured in just a much more contrasted, distinct way on film, so that when you get negative, it's already there. You don't need to add color, which benefited the feeling of richness, right? And then when he goes to Paris in this film, and he sort of emotionally loses his soul a little bit, if you say, and leaves the family behind to pursue his career. We wanted it to feel like more sterile and more sort of clean. So we shot that on digital, and with the same lenses, everything, same DI, same printer lot. And it looks very different if you look at it. And his skin tone is different. His skin tone is much more sort of smooth. And you could like that, you know, and want to go with that. And then I would go with that. So I like that better. So in that case, for the film storytelling, I thought it was a really beneficial thing to do. And not many people will notice so much. They will feel like these images looks sharp and clean and more stylized in a way, or not stylized, but like cleaner, because also the set decoration was cleaner. But it was useful to sort of change. And in First Man, we changed from 16 to 35 to IMAX for also dramatic reasons. And you see a difference. It's like different, even though it all goes digital. So I think it's more that. To me, it's more that I want to have the ability to choose whatever format feels like it tells the story the best way. And oftentimes, for me, it's usually one of the film formats that I prefer still. But I'm totally open to anything all the time. It just happens so that I do extensive camera tests in for the film. So we test all kinds of things. So.
Well, and you said like you were influenced by painters. What'd you say, Baroque? What was the...
Yeah, like the Baroque painters, that era.
So how does that like inform your on-set process? Like, are you just kind of analyzing the paintings? Are you saying like the scene feels like this one painting? Or are you kind of generalizing, saying like, oh, they tend to use one light source with bounce, or however they do it, and kind of coming up with a lighting scheme for your work that kind of reflects that?
Yeah, good question. You know what I like is actually the less specific I am, the better. But you want to be specific enough for everyone to be on the same page with the language, so that everyone could get inspired to come with ideas that is our language. Because I feel like I love the collaboration. I love that the gaffer feels like he knows what movie we're making. And it's not because I like it this way, it's because we decided this is the language of the film. So let's try to work in this little tunnel we created now in the style. And then he may have seen something or think of something or come with then the idea like, what if we use an 18K through here and the backlight comes through that window, it would be nice. So that way we all could be, when we're scouting, walking around the set with the 133 in mind, because it's decided, thinking like a painter from that time would help me enough to like say like, oh, shouldn't we be over here so we can see the full surrounding, and put the sofa more like over here and put the characters in it this way so that we can see their faces, and that way we compose this shot. And then that fits also with the lights, because then all the lights comes from maybe the fireplace in their faces, and they all get lit like an oil painting from the Baroque era. It all comes together like naturally because you have a goal. Everything is possible in the world, but when you create that language, it becomes a smaller thing, and it's more natural and easy for everyone to come with ideas. But to create that language, what I do is I definitely find images of paintings, I find photography, and then I like to create mood boards that are much more light specific than other departments usually do. So production designers office always do, art department always does mood boards, but they're usually character driven or location driven, and there could be a mix of day and night and interior exterior. So it could be a mix of light moods in it because they focus more on the character of the house or the character of the location. And mine would be like completely location free. Like it's like not, my mood boards are only lights, but it's the completeness of them, the combination of them. Usually it's like 9 images in one paper, or like in one image. And I spend time in pre-production once I know what language we should have and what mood we should have. That, for example, Saltburn, I did 2, I think, mood boards for interior Saltburn night, because there was a lot of it, like a lot of need for it, I thought. So I did 2 mood boards. And then I did for exterior sunny day, 1 mood board. I did for exterior more gloomy day, like when it was raining or foggy, as a 1 mood board. And I did like an interior day, which was 2 interior days as well, which was a lot of the Caravaggios, because they usually had a lot of those paint sort of daylight coming through a window, right? Like you have the Caravaggio and they're sitting having a meeting in a cafe or something, and it's a yellow wall and the light comes in from the side hard. And then I would take a lot of those images in a mood board are paintings, or some of them are paintings. Then it's like I'm just researching online, looking for things. Could be I look for films. It could be from a movie clip, could be from just Googling things, like Googling close-up eye. And then I take the eye, and then because I want a voyeuristic shot where you see an eye through a gap, for example, I wanted that eye. So I found an eye like that. And then I eventually create a color grade in Photoshop on all of the images to match up to one sort of palette of one mood. So therefore, you may want another palette on another mood board. And those are just for communicating. I want people to look at that mood board as one image, like from a distance, looking at the whole bind. That is what I want to try to say, like, as a whole, this is the feel. And then if you look at every single image, you may be too detail-minded, in how it references to our film. I feel like it's more like, oh, that's the mood. Okay, it's a lot of silhouette things going on, but not in every image. Some are front lit. But the combination of them becomes like one image. So those we used, and that way people got inspired to think of different compositions, the communicate with director, and when the director gets a sense of.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, who sees that? I assume if you showed it to the director and she said, "No, it's not what we're going for," you'd
totally, I changed it.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, like, you'd go back and kind of make another one. But like, once you have one that you and the director agree on, do you like show that to the production design? Do you show that to your gaffer?
Yeah.
Do the actors see that stuff? Like, is it something that?
Yeah, everyone can see it. And we usually put it together like a lookbook where production design has their lookbook, and I have sort of these mood boards, and it's definitely something that is meant to be confirming what we talked about. So hopefully most of the time these work, the images work as mood boards because they're created once I have already understood the director's vision. I try to think of all the inspiration to be very broad. When we've talked, for example, on Saltburn about Hitchcock, we talked about Hitchcock as Hitchcock, and she had her ideas of Hitchcock. I had my ideas of Hitchcock. We never watched a movie together that was a Hitchcock movie that inspired for this film, because it's enough for me to think Hitchcock for suspense and for voyeurism, and when she thinks of it, she may think different, but it doesn't matter because we're in the same part of the world. And it's better to be rough about it, I think, and not specific, because otherwise you're too locked into something.
Yeah, you're not doing a cover song. You're not copying Hitchcock. You're capturing the feeling of Hitchcock, which is slipperier, but then of course it's going to be informed by her taste, your taste, and what you think, like you want it to be your film, not.
Yeah. But also it's like that. It's like if it's too specific, it's not only that it may copy something, but it's like that you're restricted and to think outside of that. Like then, so how do we do now? Because this doesn't feel like Hitchcock. Well, it's okay because it looks like 5% Hitchcock, and that was the point of it. Of course, in film, sometimes I feel like directors like to show you a specific scene in a film to understand the director better, because the director has really a strong connection to that film, but it doesn't always need to translate literally to what we're doing, but like very strongly to the soul of it. I remember we did Joy, me and David Russell, and we watched like Paper Moon, and we watched like A Wonderful Life, right?
Oh yeah.
Great American cinema, one older than the other, right? But black and white, and our film isn't black and white, but it was in the vein of that type of cinema that we did Joy. Like we wanted to be inspired by it, and we had it with us in our hearts, kind of thing. It's like that, I think, which is always that is a great way to, if you watch movies, I think, to inspire, but not to say like I want it to look like Seven, and then you shoot it that way, I
always feel like people take the wrong lessons from stuff like that, because it's like, if you want to take a lesson from Seven, for instance, like think about the process Darius Khandji went through creating a look, and then think, how would you do a process like that for your film? And
that's it.
It's not, hey, let's do silver retention, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's good to know about those tools, but it's more about what kind of thinking created this very out of the box for its time idea.
Exactly. And that's why that film is unique and amazing looking. And it is obviously a lot of thought process going on and discussions in pre-production that made them do that decision and lit it that way, shot it that way, and had that type of rain, and the sound effects and everything is just perfected for that particular film. And nothing later has been able to shoot it looking sort of similar to that way better, I don't think. It's just, that is what that is. And exactly like you said, it's to think of it instead like, how did they come to that, and how is that process, and apply that to your stories. And then you will get your unique film with a similar quality, And I think as well, like, films shouldn't necessarily look pretty. Films should look appropriate for what the story they're telling. Like, look at like Kieslowski's Decalogue, which is I think beautiful, but it's very sort of mundane, gray, very fitting for the story it's telling, and it has its beauty for sure, but it's also like not typically pretty, right? And I think that's important too, to think of like, maybe the film shouldn't always have like great looking images, but if it fits the storytelling, then it's great too, of course. Like, you want people to appreciate the film that way too, but it's about just communicating the emotions of the film. That's the prio one, and that could be ugly.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some great movies that do kind of create that vibe. We only have like 5 more minutes, and I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I feel like I have to ask you one question, and that's about The Hedge Maze. and the fact that we see kind of a model of the hedge maze, and that obviously immediately as soon as I see a hedge maze in a movie, I'm probably not alone in thinking of The Shining. You use it in a very different way, but also you have a very real Minotaur statue in the hedge maze.
Yes.
Can you when you're doing something like that you know is going to immediately conjure in most people's minds like this very iconic, very specific thing, and in fact you're introducing it in the same way. We see it as a model, and then we see it as the real thing later. What's your approach to that? Are you saying like, let's lean into the fact that people understand the language of hedge maze, or are you like, how do we do it in a way that doesn't feel at all like The Shining? Or do you not care about The Shining and just tell your story and who gives a crap?
Yeah, honestly, we didn't think of it. Again, I feel like we try to think of our, process as a blank page, and the reason there's a maze there has more to do with sort of the metaphor, right? I mean, there's lots of symbols in this film, and like in The Shining too, the maze is symbolic. But here, the symbolism lies also in that the fact like that his journey to Saltburn is like, it's kind of an impossible thing to become the king of this house, or this house. Just like a maze, that's one thing, right? But there's in a great maze, there's always like a cheating route, and this maze had a cheating route, and he takes the cheating route. So there's more sort of like symbolic things going on like that, and I think the Manitou is a symbol for him, for Oliver, and I remember Emerald was even like giving Barry directions to remind him to, in scenes later on, like to have his pose similar to like the Manitou.
He literally like has like horns on his head.
And he has horns eventually. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's so cool.
So he slowly develops into that character. So honestly, we talked about many films, but we didn't talk about The Shining between us. Maybe she did with the production designer, but I mean, I'm sure she loves that film, and she loves lots of old cinema, and she thinks like she's sort of a Hitchcock of our time, I think, in the way she thinks about suspense, that she always wants to create suspense in the films. In every scene is sort of, the goal is to create suspense. So I kind of feel like when you walk in a maze, that's when you feel like reminiscence of The Shining too. Just think of Jack Nicholson with an axe in a but if you ground yourself in your own script, it of course happens so that a lot of stories are similar by nature because the structure of what you're telling, and then it could perhaps also be that certain things looks very much like something else. And that's why it's good to not try to get too specific in your inspiration, but be more broad, because then you hopefully just create images and create scenes that are appropriate for this film, and hopefully it's not too much like other films, unless you want to make it nod to something. And then if it's grounded in the script so it makes sense, then I think for me at least, it feels like then you're just honoring the greatest possible storytelling at the moment of the film. Like, okay, and here we're cutting to a wide side shot, and why is it not the close-up? And then if you did that decision deliberately and you have a reason for it, then I feel good. I even if that also may be looking like from another film or something. I think there's just so many. If you have a maze, I mean, what is it that how do you present it without thinking of the most iconic maze in I mean, if it would have been snowing, I guess.
Yeah, that would have.
As well, then it would have been more hard. But I feel like, I mean, then there is other scenes I feel like that I was just like, already when I read it, I felt like I was amazed how it was described so well in the script visually. Certain scenes were described very well visually, that you totally got the images already as a reader, because she writes so visually when she describes scenes. But you just got to be honest to your own sort of decision in the best way, sort of try to tell the story, I think.
Well, cool. I would love to keep talking to you about this, but I know we're out of time and we're on a tight schedule. But I think Saltburn is amazing. Like, it blew me away. I had no idea. I intentionally try and block out, the movies when I'm going to talk to someone, so I can be surprised when I walk in, and it was full of surprises. So well done. Such a gorgeous piece of work. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. So it's in theaters right now. We want to encourage anyone listening to us to go check it out.
Yes, go to the cinema.
Yeah. See it in the theater. I keep telling people, go. It's so much better to see these things on the big screen.
No, totally. But sit close. I think you should sit pretty close. It's nice.
It's very intimate. Well, thank you so much for making time, and I look forward to whatever we're going to talk about next year.
Always great to talk to you, Ben. Thank you.
All right, so that was Linus Sandgren. Hey, thank you so much for being on the show. It was great to have you as always. In our truncated version of this episode, since I'm doing it all myself, I'm going to move on to my short end, and my short end is actually...
And now, short ends.
It is a short comedy video that you can watch on Instagram. Again, the link will be down below this video or in the show notes over at camnoir.com. But it is called People Who Film Weddings, and it's from a comedian named Joey Thompson. And Joey worked with another gentleman named Sean Russell Herman to put this together. And it's very funny, and it plays upon the bugaboo I have actually about people giving themselves fancier job titles than what their job actually is. And it's one that I've mentioned before and certainly brought up wedding filmmakers as opposed to wedding videographers. Wedding videographer has been the term for a very long time. Wedding filmmaker has just sort of come into the lexicon maybe in the last 10 years. And I think there's a bunch of pretense that comes along with saying that you're a wedding filmmaker versus a wedding videographer, because wedding videographer was perfectly descriptive, but there was a movement that happened a few years back where people said, hey, we're no longer videographers, we're now filmmakers, and ignoring the fact that, being a wedding filmmaker, a wedding cinematographer is co-opting terms that don't necessarily relate to exactly what it is that you're doing for a living. I don't necessarily think that this is bad in principle, because it's someone trying to separate themselves from, what they consider a generic sort of term that lumps everyone into a relatively low quality space. But at the same time, there is nothing wrong with being a videographer. In fact, videographer is not a derogatory term. It's a term that certain people have taken to feel negative about and wanted to give themselves more, raise themselves up as in their, ability, I think, to charge for what it is that they're doing. So really trying to make more money from the same sort of work. I have a little bit of an objection to that. And I think that everyone just needs to actually be descriptive with their jobs. It's not helpful to tell people that you're doing something else, especially it's like people don't go out and pay admission to watch a wedding film. That's not a thing. It is a thing that will get watched a few times by, maybe the bride and groom or their family. And that's kind of it. And it's not the same, if there was a real market for wedding films, you'd see them on streaming services. You'd have a channel which was nothing but watching people's wedding videos. So anyway, it's a funny video. You should watch it. The links are in all the places. Check it out. That's pretty much going to do it for this episode. So thank you for bearing with me flying solo here trying to get this done. Let's thank some people. Let's thank Alana Cody, our incredible producer. Let's thank Ben Katz, our editor, who put the show together. And let's thank Kaze Alatrachi, who composed all the music you heard for this episode. You can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. Thanks for tuning in.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.